To choose is to renounce. It is to make a decision among infinite possibilities. Jean-Paul Sartre. We live in an unprecedented time where possibilities seem endless. From choosing what to eat for breakfast to making more complex decisions, like which career to pursue or where to live, we are constantly bombarded with a myriad of options. The freedom of choice, long seen as a symbol of progress and autonomy, has become a hallmark of the modern world. However, with this abundance of options comes a curious and paradoxical phenomenon. Instead of feeling freer, we often feel overwhelmed, paralyzed, and even trapped by our choices. This apparent contradiction is what we call the paradox of choice, the idea that instead of providing happiness and satisfaction, the vast array of options can lead to indecision, anxiety, and regret. This paradox is something many of us experience, whether it's the difficulty of choosing a movie to watch on a streaming platform, the uncertainty of which product to buy, or the complexity of making big decisions that could impact the course of our lives. When we reflect on what it means to have so many options at our disposal, we begin to realize that the process of choosing is not as simple as it seems. With each choice we make, we are, by definition, giving up other alternatives. And for many, this act of renunciation can be distressing. The fear of making the wrong choice, of missing out on a better opportunity, or of not achieving ideal satisfaction can create a constant state of dissatisfaction and doubt. The paradox of choice becomes even more complex when we consider the emotional impact of these decisions. With so many options, the pressure to choose the best alternative increases. And with this pressure comes the inevitable comparison. Did I make the right choice? Or what if the other option was better? These questions can lead to a cycle of regret and dissatisfaction, where, regardless of what we choose, we feel we could have done better. This feeling is amplified by the consumer culture we live in, where we are encouraged to believe that there is always a superior option, that we need to seek perfection in all our decisions. This relentless pursuit of the best choice can not only be exhausting, but also leaves us in a constant state of dissatisfaction, where we are never fully content with the choices we make. The paradox of choice is not just an individual issue. It reflects a broader shift in how our society values freedom and autonomy. For much of human history, available choices were limited, and decisions were often guided by traditions, customs, or immediate needs. However, as we move toward a more globalized and connected society, the options have multiplied exponentially, turning the act of choosing into a complex and sometimes oppressive task. In this video, I propose a deeper exploration of this paradox. We will examine how the freedom of choice, which should be a source of empowerment, can turn into a psychological trap. We will also discuss how the abundance of options affects our mental health, emotional well-being, and ability to make decisions that truly satisfy us. But before we continue, I would like to invite you to subscribe to my channel and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any updates. Also, don't forget to like the video, share it with friends and family, and leave a comment below. Your support is very important to me. Over the past few decades, the study of the psychology of choice has become an area of growing interest, especially as the modern world offers an abundance of options in nearly every aspect of our lives. Research in this field has revealed that, contrary to what one might imagine, the multiplicity of choices may not necessarily contribute to our happiness or well-being. Instead, it may lead us to a state of paralysis, anxiety, and dissatisfaction. One of the most prominent figures in this field is psychologist Barry Schwartz, author of the book, The Paradox of Choice: Why More is Less. Schwartz argues that instead of increasing our freedom and satisfaction, an excess of options can overwhelm us and reduce our ability to make effective decisions. He identifies two main negative effects that arise when we are confronted with too many choices: decision paralysis and post-choice dissatisfaction. When confronted with too many options, we can experience what Schwartz calls decision paralysis. This phenomenon occurs when the vast range of available choices leaves us indecisive, unable to make a decision. Imagine being in a supermarket in front of a shelf with dozens of brands of the same product. With so many options, it's easy to become paralyzed, trying to weigh the pros and cons of each choice, which can lead to a state of inaction. This paralysis is exacerbated by the internal pressure to make the best possible choice. When we have few options, the decision seems simpler and less risky, as there aren't as many alternatives to compare. However, when the options multiply, the mind enters a state of cognitive overload, where each decision requires more mental effort to consider all the variables. This can result in a delay in decision-making, or even a total avoidance of making a decision, leaving us stuck in a cycle of indecision. Another important psychological aspect of the paradox of choice is the dissatisfaction that often follows a decision. Even after finally making a choice, the mind tends to fixate on the options that were left behind. This phenomenon is known as post-choice regret and can manifest in various ways, from mild dissatisfaction to deep regret. Post-choice regret is amplified by the idea that with so many options available, we should be able to choose the perfect alternative. However, this pursuit of perfection is illusory, as no choice can satisfy all our expectations or needs. As a result, when we choose one option, the mind often begins to imagine that the rejected alternatives could have been better, generating a feeling of loss or missed opportunity. This regret can be exacerbated by social comparison, a behavior widely studied in psychology. We live in a society where we are constantly exposed to the choices and achievements of others, especially through social media. This leads us to compare our decisions with those of others, which can further increase the feeling of dissatisfaction with our own choices. The perception that others seem to have made better choices can intensify regret and frustration. Another important approach in the psychology of choice is the distinction between maximizers and satisficers, terms popularized by the work of Schwartz and other researchers. Maximizers are people who seek to make the best possible choice, exhaustively evaluating all available options before making a decision. They are constantly searching for the best alternative, which can lead to higher levels of stress and dissatisfaction. On the other hand, satisficers tend to seek a choice that is good enough and meets their basic criteria for satisfaction without the need to explore all available options. Satisficers generally report higher levels of satisfaction with their choices because they are less likely to dwell on the alternatives they didn't choose and more inclined to accept their decisions as adequate. The psychology of choice, therefore, reveals that the way we approach the decision-making process can have a significant impact on our emotional well-being. Maximizers, with their relentless pursuit of the perfect choice, often experience more anxiety and regret, while satisficers tend to be more easily content with their decisions. Understanding these differences can help us adopt more effective strategies for dealing with the abundance of options and minimizing the negative effects that an excess of choices can bring. The psychology of choice shows us that while the freedom of choice is widely valued, it also brings with it psychological challenges that can affect our ability to make decisions and our satisfaction with those decisions. Decision paralysis and post-choice dissatisfaction are common phenomena in a world full of options, and understanding these mechanisms can help us better navigate this reality. Existentialist philosophy, which flourished primarily in Europe during the 20th century, addresses the issue of freedom of choice in a profoundly introspective and, in many ways, distressing manner. For existentialists, Freedom is one of the fundamental characteristics of the human condition, but this freedom comes with an almost unbearable burden: the total responsibility for our choices and, consequently, for creating meaning in our lives. One of the main existentialist thinkers, Jean-Paul Sartre, famously stated that man is condemned to be free. This declaration encapsulates the essence of the existentialist view of freedom. We cannot escape our freedom of choice, and with it, we are forced to face the total responsibility for the consequences of our decisions. Sartre believed that, unlike other creatures, human beings do not have a predetermined essence. Instead, our existence precedes our essence, meaning that we are thrown into the world without a defined purpose, and, from there, we have to create our own meaning through our choices. This radical freedom, while liberating in theory, also brings with it a heavy burden. Sartre speaks of the nausea that can arise when we confront absolute freedom and the absence of inherent meaning in the universe. Without an essence or predetermined purpose, we are responsible for giving meaning to our lives through our choices. However, this responsibility can be overwhelming, leading to what Sartre called existential anguish. Anguish, according to Sartre, is the emotional experience we feel when we recognize the total freedom of our choices and the responsibility that this freedom imposes. It is the recognition that, in every decision, we are defining who we are and who we want to be, without the guidance of an essential nature or a predetermined destiny. Every choice we make is an act of creation, but also a renunciation of all other possibilities, which can leave us constantly on the verge of regret and doubt. This notion of freedom is also explored by other existentialist thinkers, such as Søren Kierkegaard and Albert Camus. Kierkegaard, often considered the father of existentialism, described the concept of despair as the condition of a human being who tries to avoid the responsibility of their own freedom. For Kierkegaard, the attempt to escape freedom, whether through conformity or by refusing to make meaningful choices, results in an inauthentic life filled with despair. He argued that the only way to live authentically is to embrace freedom, despite the fear and anguish it may provoke. Albert Camus, another great exponent of existentialism, introduced the idea of the absurd. For Camus, the absurd arises from the conflict between the human desire to find meaning in life and the apparent indifference or silence of the universe. In a world where life has no predefined meaning, the human being is confronted with the need to create their own meaning, but always under the shadow of the absurd. Camus argued that accepting the absurd, the acceptance that life is inherently meaningless, but that we must live fully despite this, is a way of dealing with freedom without succumbing to anguish. The paradox of choice, through the lens of existentialism, reveals itself in all its complexity. On the one hand, the multiplicity of choices we have in modern life can give us a sense of freedom, but on the other hand, this same freedom can throw us into a state of constant uncertainty and anguish. The pressure to make the right choice, the best choice, is amplified by the existential awareness that each decision is a step in the construction of our own identity and sense of life. Existentialists also remind us that while we may try to avoid this anguish through conformity or by delegating our choices to external forces such as traditions, social norms, or authority figures, this escape is, in itself, a choice. Sartre is clear in his assertion that even the refusal to choose is a choice in itself, and thus we are always engaged in this process of creation and responsibility. Existentialist philosophy challenges us to face the paradox of choice with courage and authenticity. We are called to accept freedom as an inescapable aspect of human existence, and with it, to embrace the responsibility of creating meaning in our lives through our decisions. Anguish, in this sense, is not something to be avoided, but rather a sign that we are living in accordance with our true nature as free beings. Behavioral economics is an interdisciplinary field that combines insights from psychology and economics to understand how people actually make economic decisions, and more importantly, how those decisions can deviate from the patterns predicted by traditional economic theory. In the context of the paradox of choice, behavioral economics offers a fascinating perspective on how the multiplicity of options can influence our behavior in ways that are not always rational or predictable. Traditionally, classical economic theory assumes that individuals are rational agents who make decisions to maximize their utility, that is, to achieve the greatest possible benefit. However, behavioral economics challenges this view, showing that, in practice, people often make decisions that are not optimized for their well-being, or that contradict what would be considered rational in a strictly economic sense. One of the central concepts in behavioral economics that directly relates to the paradox of choice is the phenomenon known as choice overload. Studies conducted by researchers like Sheena Iyengar and Mark Lepper have shown that, although a greater number of options may initially attract consumers, it can also lead to lower satisfaction and even a reduction in the likelihood of making a choice. In a classic experiment, Iyengar and Lepper found that in a grocery store, when consumers were presented with a selection of 24 different types of jams, only 3% of them made a purchase. However, when the selection was reduced to 6 options, the purchase rate rose to 30%. This study illustrates how a greater number of choices can lead to cognitive overload, making decision-making more difficult. Another important concept in behavioral economics is maximization versus satisficing, which has already been discussed in the psychological context, but also has economic implications. Maximizers are individuals who seek the best possible option, while satisficers seek a choice that is good enough. Behavioral economics shows us that maximizers, although they believe they are making more rational and optimized decisions, often end up less satisfied with their choices due to post-choice regret and the constant doubt about whether they made the right choice. This is related to the concept of opportunity cost, which in traditional economics refers to the value of the best alternative not chosen. For maximizers, the opportunity cost is mentally heavy, as they are always aware of the alternatives that could have been chosen. Loss aversion is another fundamental concept in behavioral economics that influences how we deal with choices. Studies show that people tend to assign more value to what they already possess compared to something they do not yet have, a phenomenon known as the endowment effect. This means that when making a choice, we often focus more on the possible losses associated with the options we are discarding than on the potential gains of the choice we are making. This loss aversion can lead to inertia or status quo bias, where people tend to choose options that keep things as they are, even if better alternatives are available. Inertia is often a response to the fear of making a decision that could result in regret or a perception of loss. Another important element of behavioral economics is the influence of heuristics, which are mental shortcuts that people use to make decisions more quickly and efficiently, but that do not always lead to the best outcome. One example is the availability heuristic, where people base their choices on the ease with which examples come to mind. For example, if someone had a bad experience buying a product from a particular brand, that experience may weigh disproportionately in future decisions, even if the brand generally has good reviews. In the context of multiple choices, heuristics can lead to suboptimal decisions, as information overload makes people rely on simplified rules to make their decisions. In addition, prospect theory, developed by Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, introduces the concept that people evaluate gains and losses differently. The theory suggests that losses are felt more intensely than gains, which can distort how we make decisions in choice situations. For example, when faced with a choice between a safe option and a risky one, people tend to avoid risk when it comes to potential gains, but may prefer to take risks when trying to avoid a loss. This may explain why, when confronted with many options, people sometimes choose safer or more familiar alternatives, even if these are not the best choices in absolute terms. Behavioral economics also explores the phenomenon of anticipated regret. This concept refers to the tendency to avoid decisions that might result in regret in the future. When faced with many options, people may anticipate the potential regret of making the wrong choice, which can lead to indecision or the selection of an option that minimizes the risk of regret but does not necessarily maximize the benefit. Behavioral economics provides us with a deeper understanding of how people actually make decisions in a world full of choices. By revealing the limitations of human rationality and the numerous biases that influence our choices, this field of study helps us understand why an abundance of options can be so challenging. The paradox of choice, in light of behavioral economics, is not just a psychological phenomenon, but also an issue that profoundly affects our economic behavior and our satisfaction with the decisions we make. Through psychology, existentialist philosophy, and behavioral economics, we have seen how our minds are shaped, and in many cases, overwhelmed by the act of choosing. We have realized that the relentless pursuit of the best option can drive us away from true satisfaction, leaving us trapped in a cycle of regret and doubt. But by understanding these mechanisms, we can begin to adopt strategies to simplify our lives and find a healthier balance. Learning to accept good enough, consciously limiting our options, and focusing on what truly matters are steps that can help us navigate the labyrinth of choices we face daily. I want to thank you for joining me in this reflection. I hope you have found new perspectives on how the freedom of choice can be both a blessing and a curse, and how we can learn to better deal with this reality. Please subscribe to my channel. Don't forget to like the video, share it with friends and family, and leave a comment. Your support is essential to keep me motivated to bring more valuable content to our community. See you next time.